What if I told you Chevrolet built an engine so powerful, so dangerous, that it was practically erased from history? The ZL1 wasn't just a high-performance V8, it was a mechanical monster that threatened to upend the muscle car wars forever. Officially, it was rated at 430 horsepower, but insiders knew the truth. This engine was pushing well over 550 horsepower straight from the factory. So why was it silenced? Why did General Motors abruptly bury its most powerful creation? Was it corporate politics or something even darker? Buckle up, this is the shocking true story of the banned ZL1427. The ZL1427 wasn't just another big block, it was an engineering experiment gone rogue. Born from Chevrolet's top-secret racing division, this all-aluminum beast was designed for one purpose only: to dominate the track. It was lightweight, brutally powerful, and completely illegal under GM's corporate racing ban. In the late 1960s, General Motors had officially pulled out of motorsports, forbidding factory-backed racing programs. But Chevrolet's engineers weren't ready to surrender. They needed a way to bypass the corporate overlords and get this forbidden engine into the hands of racers. Their solution? COPO, the Central Office Production Order System, a loophole that allowed high-performance cars to be built in secret. Only a handful of insiders knew about the ZL1 project, and even fewer were aware of the true power it possessed. On paper, it was rated at 430 horsepower, but real-world tests revealed something shocking. This engine was cranking out over 550 horsepower, making it one of the most overpowered factory engines of its time. But Chevrolet was playing a dangerous game. If the truth got out, GM could shut the whole operation down. And that's exactly what happened, because the ZL1 wasn't just fast. It was too fast for its own good. Chevrolet claimed the ZL1427 made 430 horsepower, but that was a flat-out lie. In reality, this engine was a fire-breathing monster, churning out well over 550 horsepower on the dyno. Some say it even pushed 600 horsepower in the right hands, but why would Chevrolet downplay its own masterpiece? The answer is as shocking as the engine itself. In the late 60s, automakers were playing a high-stakes game of deception. Too much advertised horsepower meant higher insurance premiums, scaring off customers. But there was something even bigger at play. NASCAR and NHRA were watching. If Chevrolet admitted the true power of the ZL1, it could face regulatory crackdowns and be banned from racing entirely. So they did what any outlaw would do: they lied. They rated the ZL1 just low enough to slip past the radar, knowing full well that anyone lucky enough to get their hands on one was buying a rocket disguised as a Camaro. But this deception couldn't last forever. Word spread fast, and soon the racing world realized what Chevrolet had done. The ZL1 was too powerful, too fast, and too dangerous to be ignored. And that's when the real trouble began. The ZL1427 wasn't just a powerful engine, it was a declaration of war. Chevrolet had built something so radical, so untamed, that it sent shockwaves through the entire muscle car industry. Ford had the Cobra Jet, Chrysler had the 426 Hemi, but neither could match the sheer brutality of the aluminum ZL1. Weighing nearly 100 pounds lighter than a standard big block, this engine turned any Camaro or Corvette into a track-destroying missile. Word spread fast among racers. Ford engineers were panicking. Chrysler was scrambling for answers. If Chevrolet unleashed this monster on the streets, it could end the muscle car war before it even peaked. But just as the ZL1 was about to change everything, something strange happened. It disappeared. General Motors buried it, production was slashed, and suddenly, the most powerful engine Chevy had ever built vanished from showrooms. Did Ford and Chrysler pressure GM into shutting it down? Did Chevrolet fear its own creation? Or was there an even bigger secret lurking beneath the surface? One thing was certain: the ZL1 was too dangerous to be left unchecked, and soon the racing world would find out why. The ZL1427 wasn't born in a boardroom. It was created in secrecy, deep inside Chevrolet's underground performance division. This wasn't just another engine, it was a forbidden experiment, an engineering project so extreme that it had to be hidden from GM's corporate executives. In the late 1960s, Chevrolet was dominating the streets, but they wanted more. They needed something that could crush the competition in drag racing, stock car racing, and Can-Am. That's when an elite group of Chevrolet engineers working in total secrecy began developing a full aluminum version of the legendary L88427 Big Block. This wasn't just about power, it was about weight reduction. The ZL1's aluminum block made it 100 pounds lighter than a standard 427, allowing it to reach speeds that seemed impossible for a factory-built car. The results were terrifying. The ZL1 powered Camaros and Corvettes were clocking speeds that threatened to rewrite the record books. But just as the project was reaching its peak, GM executives found out, and what they did next would change muscle car history forever. Because this wasn't just about performance anymore, it was about stopping a monster before it became unstoppable. When General Motors clamped down on factory-backed racing in the early 60s, they thought they had locked the doors on performance. But Chevrolet's engineers weren't about to let that stop them. They found a loophole, and it was called COPO. The Central Office Production Order COPO system was supposed to be for special fleet orders, nothing more. But for a few select insiders, COPO became a backdoor into Chevrolet's most daring performance projects. One of those projects, the ZL1427. Thanks to a special order from Fred Gibb, a Chevrolet dealer, the ZL1 engine found its way into production cars, specifically 69 ZL1 Camaros, under the radar. This wasn't just a car, it was a race car built for the street. The engine was a monster, pushing 550-plus horsepower, but the public didn't know what hit them. These Camaros were sold as regular models, but they were anything but. The ZL1 was so radical, so far beyond anything available to the public, that Chevrolet's corporate overlords had no idea it was happening until it was too late. They thought they could keep the ZL1 locked away, but through COPO, Chevrolet had pulled off the ultimate sneak attack, unleashing one of the fastest muscle cars ever built. And nobody was prepared for the chaos it would cause. The ZL1 Camaro was a fire-breathing monster, a car that had the potential to revolutionize the muscle car market, but instead, it became a sales disaster. Chevrolet had produced just 69 of these insane machines, but the problem wasn't the car, it was the price. At a whopping $7,000, the ZL1 Camaro was nearly double the price of a standard Camaro. For many buyers, it was simply too expensive for a muscle car, especially when there were faster, cheaper options like the Hemi-powered Chrysler cars or the Cobra Jet Ford Mustangs. The price tag alone meant that Chevrolet was only able to sell a fraction of the ZL1 Camaros it had hoped for. But there was more to the disaster than just price. The ZL1 wasn't just an expensive car, it was a track-ready monster. Most buyers weren't ready for the raw power and had no idea what they were getting into. The car was too fast, too aggressive, and it required serious driving skill to keep it from getting out of control. As a result, the ZL1 Camaros sat unsold on lots, while Chevrolet tried to figure out how to handle a car that was too good for the market it was intended for. It was a missed opportunity, but the ZL1's legacy would live on for those who could handle its power. The ZL1427 wasn't just a road car. It was engineered for racing glory. Chevrolet had designed it with one goal: to obliterate its competitors on the track. The engine was capable of unmatched power, easily making the ZL1 Camaro a contender in NASCAR's most grueling races. But there was a serious roadblock. This beast would never race. The NASCAR homologation rules required manufacturers to build a certain number of production cars before a racing engine could qualify for competition. Chevrolet knew they could easily meet the numbers with the ZL1. But there was a massive problem. Chevrolet was bound by its own self-imposed ban on racing. Back in 1963, GM had officially withdrawn from factory-backed racing. The ZL1, no matter how potent, was too much for the corporate powers to allow it to compete. Despite its raw power and revolutionary design, GM feared the consequences of unleashing such an engine in a high-profile NASCAR event. This meant that despite being superior in almost every way to other engines, the ZL1 was stuck in the shadows, never able to claim the racing glory it deserved. Instead of becoming the NASCAR legend it could have been, the ZL1 stayed on the sidelines, forever overshadowed by the corporate politics that prevented it from reaching its full potential. When the ZL1427 hit the racing scene, it didn't just turn heads, it scared the competition. As soon as drag racers saw the ZL1's raw power, they knew it was game over. The National Hot Rod Association, NHRA, the governing body for professional drag racing, was quick to take notice. What they saw was an engine capable of obliterating records and pushing performance beyond anything they'd ever imagined. The ZL1 wasn't just powerful, it was too powerful. NHRA regulations were based on the idea that every car should have a fair chance, but with the ZL1's unholy horsepower, the playing field wasn't level anymore. The ZL1 could easily outpace any competitor, even the HEMI, and that wasn't fair. It was like bringing a nuclear bomb to a knife fight. So, the NHRA did what it had to do. They reclassified the ZL1. The association was forced to create special categories and limitations to keep the ZL1 from dominating every race it entered. But even that couldn't stop the ZL1's legacy from shining through. This engine was so overwhelmingly fast that it forced regulator to change the rules. It wasn't just a race car, it was a nightmare for anyone trying to keep the sport fair. And as it sat out of official races, the legend of the ZL1 only grew. Just as quickly as it arrived, the ZL1427 disappeared from the spotlight. After briefly taking the performance world by storm, this engine was pulled from production, and it wasn't because it had failed. In fact, it was the opposite. The ZL1 was so powerful, so ahead of its time, that Chevrolet couldn't handle the consequences. It was like releasing a caged beast into the world and then trying to lock it up again. Chevrolet faced mounting pressure from within. The price tag for the ZL1 Camaro was simply too high, and the public was hesitant to embrace a car that had track-level power. Dealers struggled to sell the few units produced, and General Motors quickly realized it had created an engine that was just too dangerous to be on the streets. They had unleashed a beast that nobody was ready for. Rumors began circulating about the ZL1's future. Some say Chevrolet destroyed the remaining engines. Others claim they were hidden away, carefully locked in GM's vaults. Regardless of the truth, the ZL1 was suddenly gone, leaving behind nothing but whispers and legends. But the question remained, did GM really kill the ZL1? Or was there something darker at play, something more sinister, keeping it from the public eye? When the ZL1 Camaro failed to meet its sales targets, Chevrolet was left with a problem: what to do with the unsold cars. The ZL1 was too powerful, too expensive, and simply too much for most buyers, so several units sat unsold at dealerships, gathering dust. But what happened to those cars that never made it into the hands of eager buyers? Some say that Chevrolet destroyed the unsold ZL1 Camaros, carefully crushing them or sending them to the scrapyard. After all, they were too dangerous for the streets, and GM wanted to avoid any potential scandal. But others whisper that some of these unsold cars were smuggled out of the factory and hidden away, kept secret in private collections or tucked into underground garages. A few lucky buyers may have managed to snatch them up, unaware of the engine's full capabilities. Perhaps these Camaros were kept under wraps, hidden from the public eye, only to surface decades later as valuable treasures for collectors. The fate of those unsold ZL1 Camaros remains one of the greatest mysteries in Chevrolet's history. Were they destroyed, or were they preserved for a time when the world was ready to understand their true power? The truth is still out there, and the ZL1 might still be lurking in the shadows. In hindsight, Chevrolet made one of its biggest mistakes by not fully unleashing the ZL1427. This engine had the power to change the entire muscle car market, But instead, GM pulled back. The ZL1 could have been the engine that redefined performance, dominating the racing world and setting new standards for power, speed, and engineering. But Chevrolet's leadership was too cautious, too afraid of the backlash that would come with such a radical creation. The ZL1's power was undeniable. With over 550 horsepower straight from the factory, this engine could easily have become the king of the street and track. But Chevrolet allowed political pressures and market realities to get in the way. The price tag was too high, and the sales numbers didn't meet expectations. As a result, GM pulled the plug and let the ZL1 fade into obscurity. But what if they had pushed forward? What if Chevrolet had fully embraced the ZL1's capabilities and marketed it as the ultimate performance machine? The Camaro could have become the uncontested leader of the muscle car world with the ZL1 at its heart. Instead, Chevrolet let this unstoppable beast slip through its fingers. In the end, the ZL1's untapped potential serves as a bitter reminder of what could have been and what the world will never truly know. The ZL1427 may have vanished from the streets in the late 1960s, but its legacy was far from over. Decades later, Chevrolet would resurrect the ZL1 name, breathing new life into this forbidden engine with the 1996 Camaro ZL1. But could the modern version ever live up to the reputation of its forebear? When Chevrolet unveiled the new ZL1, it was clear that they had revisited their past, a past that was rooted in unmatched power and engineering brilliance. The 2012 Camaro ZL1 made waves with its supercharged 6.2-liter V8, pushing out a whopping 580 horsepower. While the numbers were impressive, many wondered, could this new generation of ZL1 capture the raw, untamed power of the original 427? Some enthusiasts believed that the modern ZL1 was a mere shadow of its predecessor. The ZL1 427 was a beast, a machine forged for track dominance in an era of unregulated performance. The 2012 ZL1, while powerful, was engineered to meet the needs of today's world, where safety and environmental standards have reshaped the landscape of performance cars. Yet, there's something about the ZL1's resurgence that makes us wonder. Could Chevrolet have unleashed something even bigger? Was this just a tip of the iceberg, a hint at what might still lie beneath the surface? The legacy of the ZL1427 continues to whisper. While the official history of the ZL1 Camaro may have ended in the late 60s, the legend never truly died. In the underground world of car enthusiasts, the ZL1 story continued, only this time it wasn't in showrooms or racetracks. It was hidden in the shadows. Enthusiasts, racers, and collectors who knew the truth about the ZL1 began to scavenge for the rare gems that had slipped through the cracks. Some of the original 1969 ZL1 Camaros that had never been sold or were secretly squirreled away by dealers found their way into private collections where they sat, sometimes for decades, untouched and out of sight. These cars weren't just rare, they were living relics of a time when performance knew no limits. In some cases, they were restored, rebuilt, and pushed back into the underground racing scene. By the 1980s and 1990s, the ZL1 became a cult classic, with its rare engine becoming the stuff of legends in car clubs and underground races. But these cars weren't just being admired, they were being raced, often modified to unleash the kind of power Chevrolet had once feared. The ZL1 underground movement proved that the car and the engine it contained couldn't be contained. It was too powerful to be forgotten and too dangerous to stay in the shadows for long. The ZL1427 may have been buried, suppressed, and nearly erased from history, but its legacy refuses to fade. It was an engine ahead of its time, a brutal force that Chevrolet couldn't control and the world couldn't ignore. Though it was pulled from production, its impact remains undeniable, a symbol of what could have been. The ZL1 wasn't just a car, it was a philosophy of power, raw, untamed, and unapologetic. Over the decades, it transformed from a footnote in automotive history to a legend. Even today, the name ZL1 evokes a sense of awe, power, and mystery. Modern collectors and enthusiasts still chase the original 427 Camaros, knowing that owning one means possessing a piece of automotive history. Chevrolet's own engineers were left to wonder, what if they had unleashed the ZL1's full potential on the world? What if it had been allowed to race, to dominate, to redefine performance? The answer lies in the powerful reverence the ZL1 still commands today. The ZL1 427 was never meant to be just another engine. It was too much, too fast, too furious, and too bold for the times. But the truth is this, the ZL1 will never die. It's out there in the hands of a select few, waiting to be unleashed once again. And when it does, the world will remember why it was too powerful to contain.